What if the most dangerous thing to give your family wasn't a threat, but an act of charity? The thud on their Kolkata doorstep wasn't a knock. It was a verdict. A week before Durga Puja, a sealed wooden box was left for the Malakar family. No note, no sender. Inside, instead of hope, were neatly folded second-hand clothes. The daughter, Maya, 9. A child who feels the stories trapped in old objects, placed her hands on a faded yellow dress and flinched. "This one is so hungry," she whispered. That night, a cold that had nothing to do with winter invaded their home. Maya woke up, drawn to her window pane, now thick with beautiful, impossible frost. Outside in the humid air, a shape stood perfectly still. A tall, thin figure stitched together from ragged cloth and shadow. Where its face should be, 2 tarnished brass buttons drank the moonlight. She ran to her father, Rohan, a man crumbling from unemployment. "Papa, the hungry man is here." Blind with a protector's rage, Rohan grabbed his ancient rifle. He burst into the alley and fired. The gunshot was deafening. The entity did not flinch. The sound was swallowed whole by its form. The brass-button eyes just watched, calculating. One dimmed slightly. A tally had been marked. A debt was now due. The silence after the gunshot was the loudest sound Rohan had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking the warmth from his soul. The accountant's finger remained extended, a single, accusatory stitch in the fabric of the night, pointing through the wall at his daughter. It was then that the smell hit him. Not rot, not decay, but the ghost of a scent that clawed at a memory buried deep in his DNA. The rich, nutty aroma of lapsi, a sweet porridge his starving ancestors would have killed for. The smell poured from the entity, a cruel mockery of sustenance, and it made his stomach cramp with a hunger that was 70 years old. He stumbled back inside, slamming the door, his body blocking it as if he could hold back the tide of history with his weight. His wife, Priya, was awake, her face a mask of confusion. But it was Great Aunt Devi's reaction that froze him. She stood in the doorway of her room, not afraid, but furious. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, were fixed on a point just past Rohan. "You fired the family gun," she hissed, her voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "You added to the debt. Fool. You always pay for the noise." Before Rohan could speak, a small sound came from Maya's room. A rhythmic, metallic click-clack. They found her sitting upright in bed, asleep. In her hands was the small, wooden toy loom she'd always ignored. But now her small fingers were flying, weaving an invisible thread with a speed and skill she never possessed. And she was whispering, her voice not her own, but that of a tired old man. Account of Rutan Malakar, for 2 mons of rice, confiscated for non-payment of tax. Debt remains. Debt always remains. She was weaving their ledger. She was reciting the entry of her own great-great-grandfather, the one who had watched the company men take the food from his children's mouths. The accountant wasn't outside to scare them. It was outside to audit them. And Maya had become its living, breathing spreadsheet. The horror wasn't in the threat of death, but in the exhumation of a shame they never knew they carried. The bill wasn't for money. It was for silence. And the payment was about to come due. Rohan lunged for Maya, to wake her from the trance. But Great Aunt Devi's brittle hand caught his wrist with a strength that shouldn't exist. "You still don't see," she whispered, her eyes wide with a terrible clarity. "The debt isn't rice or rupees. It's a story. The company men didn't just take the grain. They forced him to weave the reason why into a sari for the collector's wife. A beautiful story of a bountiful harvest. He wove our starvation into their celebration." She pointed a trembling finger at the box of clothes. "That horror is in the thread. The accountant doesn't want our lives. It wants the story back. It wants to unweave it from history." As she spoke, the frost on the window melted not into water, but into black, inky symbols. Columns of names and numbers, the original tax ledger. The accountant form shifted. It wasn't a monster. It was a loom, its spindly arms now taut with threads of shadow. Maya's eyes flew open. She wasn't speaking the debt anymore. She was singing it, a beautiful, haunting lullaby their family had sung for generations. The lyrics were a farmer's love song to his land. The terrible truth crashed onto Rohan. The song wasn't a comfort. It was the final receipt. The accountant had come to collect the last copy of the story, the one sung in their bloodline, to erase the Malakars from history completely. The ultimate audit. Rohan understood. The gunshot wasn't an attack. It was a signature, a confirmation of the debt's recipient. The accountant's loom arms began to move, pulling at the inky ledger on the window. With each thread it pulled, a memory unraveled from the family. Priya forgot Maya's name. Maya forgot how to speak Bengali, her words turning to static. Rohan forgot the feel of silk. They were being unmade. Not killed. Deleted. But Great-Aunt Devi did not forget. She had hoarded memories for this. She stepped forward, not to fight, but to negotiate. "The debt is paid," she stated, her voice the only solid thing left in the dissolving room. She reached into the box and pulled out the first item given to them. A pristine, child's dress. It was the one thing Maya had refused to touch. "This was yours," Devi said to the entity. "You were the collector's daughter. You wore this dress woven with our starvation. Your father's sin is your inheritance. Your silence was the original charity." The entity froze. The tarnished buttons, her eyes, flickered with a forgotten memory. A child uneasy at a lavish party, wearing a beautiful, itchy dress. The horror wasn't a monster. It was a victim of the same system, sent to balance a ledger it never knew it was part of. The true twist was that the charity box contained her own haunted garment. The weaving stopped. The debt was not cancelled, but transferred. The accountant turned its empty gaze back to the cold, uncaring stars from which it came, finally aware of its own endless, miserable loop. It had come to collect a story, and instead was given one back. It was the only currency it understood. It left behind a perfectly silent family, and a single second-hand dress lying neatly folded on the floor. The most terrifying gift of all. The silence in the flat was absolute. Not even the distant hum of a rickshaw engine pierced it. The Malakar family stood as living portraits, their memories a blank slate. Then a single sound, the rustle of the pristine child's dress on the floor. It began to glow with a soft, golden light, like the first ray of the sun on Durga Puja morning. From the kitchen, a new smell cut through the void. Not lapsi, but the rich, sweet aroma of payasam, the traditional offering of milk, rice, and jaggery. It was the smell of prayer, of purity, of an offering to the divine. The dress was not a curse. It was a prasanam, a sacred offering left by a penitent spirit. The collector's daughter, finally aware of her father's sin, had not sent a monster. She had sent a vessel for atonement. The sweet smell of the payasam filled their lungs. And with each breath, a single memory returned, not of hunger or debt, but of joy. Rohan remembered his father's laugh. Priya remembered the feel of her wedding sari. Maya remembered the words to a lullaby. They were not given back everything. The horror was erased, leaving only a gentle, bittersweet sadness. The entity's final act was not to collect, but to give. It gave them peace by taking the poisoned memories away. The family, forever changed, sat together in the quiet dawn. They did not speak. They simply shared a bowl of payasam that had appeared on their table, an offering accepted. The debt was not transferred. It was dissolved in an act of ultimate, sacred charity. A week later, on Durga Puja morning, the memory of the cold was a fading bruise on their minds. The silence had been replaced by a single, driving impulse from Rohan. Anodon, the sacred act of offering food to the hungry. With the last of his money, he did not buy new clothes. He bought sacks of rice, lentils, and vegetables. In the alley outside their building, he and Priya set up a massive pot over a fire. The smell of khichdi, the humble, life-giving dish of rice and lentils, began to spread. Maya, her voice still quiet, did not play. She stood at the head of the line that quickly formed, holding a ladle. Her job was not to serve, but to look into the eyes of every hungry person who came forward, the rickshaw puller, the street sweeper, the forgotten elder. She was not seeking a monster. She was performing darshan, the sacred exchange of sight that acknowledges a soul. As she looked into the eyes of a thin little girl her own age, she did not see a victim. She saw a reflection. The khichdi steam wrapped around them like a warm blessing. The little girl smiled, a simple human smile. And in that moment, Maya remembered everything. Not the horror, but the truth. The true charity was not in receiving, but in giving. The ultimate protection was not a gun, but a shared meal. The entity had not been destroyed. It had been satiated by the one thing that could ever balance the books. An act of pure, selfless giving. The cycle was broken, not by a hero but by a choice. The family had chosen to feed the hunger they had understood, forever ensuring no other would need to send a gift of atonement again. Months passed. The flat held a new piece, a sanskara, a lasting impression of a sacred act. One evening, a formal letter arrived. No return address. Inside was not a bill, but a deed to a small, shuttered silk loom workshop, paid in full. The title was in Rohan's name. It was not a reward. It was a restoration. The universe had balanced its ledger. Rohan stood at the door of the old workshop, his father's key in his hand. A key he now realized he had always carried, waiting for this moment. He did not see dust and decay. He saw his heritage. He looked at his family behind him, their faces full of a quiet, resilient light. The horror had not broken them. It had forged them. They had not received a gift. They had earned a legacy. The story ends not with a scream, but with the soft, hopeful click of a turning key. Subscribe to the Veil of Secret for more tales where history whispers and the past demands to be heard.